and beat her savagely. After 3 years, she managed to escape from him. And she said, I quote, "Not because I knew that he would kill me, but because I thought I would kill him." Then in the Netherlands for a while, she was a prostitute again, until she met Ricky Abrams, a feminist and fellow expatriate who sheltered Dworkin in her home in the Netherlands and helped her find places to stay on houseboats, a communal farm, or some deserted buildings. Abrams introduced Dworkin to early radical feminist writings from the United States. Then Dworkin herself wrote her first book, which she titled Woman Hating. It was published in 1974 after she came back to the United States. And she declared the book's objective was, I quote, was to destroy patriarchal power at its source, the family, and in its most hideous form, the national state. Returning to the USA and now identifying as lesbian, in 1974 she met writer and activist John Stoltenberg when they both walked out on a poetry reading in Greenwich Village over misogynist material, as she put it. They became close friends and eventually came to live together. But she continued to publicly identify herself as lesbian, and he was a gay. Bizarre. Stoltenberg recounted the perplexity that their relationship seemed to cause people in the press, summarized the relationship by saying, and I quote him, "So I state only the simplest facts publicly. Yes, Andrea and I live together and love each other, and we are each other's life partner. And yes, we are both out." Well, Dworkin and Stoltenberg eventually even got married in 1998. After her death, Stoltenberg said, I quote, "It is why we never told anybody really that we married, because people get confused about that. They think, oh, she's yours, and we just did not want that nonsense." End of quote. Bizarre, isn't it? Mr. Stoltenberg is the author of 2 books, Refusing to be a Man, and another book, The End of Manhood. While his wife, radical feminist and lesbian Andrea Dworkin, authored 10 books of radical feminist theory and practice and numerous speeches and articles. She put forth a number of shocking theses about male-female relationships and spent her career as a radical feminist inciting hatred against man. Here are just a few random quotes from her publications that show how she demonized man. She said, for example, "I want to see a man beaten to a bloody pulp with a high heel shaft in his mouth like an apple in the mouth of a pig." End of quote. She also said, "Marriage is a legal license to rape." And how about this one? She said, "All men benefit from rape because all men benefit from the fact that women are not free in this society." Well, feminists want to give her today a kind of sainthood. She was a bedrock, the place to start from. Even when you disagreed with her, her arguments were infuriating, fascinating, hard to forget, says Catherine Weiner in the Guardian obituary. When a newspaper interviewer asked her how she would like to be remembered, Dworkin said, I quote, "In a museum, when male supremacy is dead, I would like my work to be an anthropological artifact from an extinct primitive society." Gloria Steinem, who has been a close friend of Dworkin's for more than 30 years, repeatedly compared her to the Old Testament prophets. Actually, this is on back cover of her autobiography. As Gloria Steinem also said, and I quote, "In every century there are a handful of writers who helped the human race evolve. Andrea is one of them." Catherine McKinnon, Dworkin's longtime friend and collaborator, published a column in the New York Times celebrating what she described as Dworkin's incandescent literary and political career, and suggested that Dworkin deserved a nomination for the Nobel Prize in Literature. But well, regardless of what I think about her, I also must admit that there were a few things she said I too agree with. For example, with her idea that rape victims should be allowed to personally execute their attackers. Good. Dworkin said that a semi-automatic gun is one answer to the problem of violence against women. And she also advocated and called for the assassination, as she said, of pedophiles. And my favorite Dworkin moment was the story of her long-time rivalry with Allen Ginsberg, who apparently said pompously, "You know, the right wants me in jail." And Dworkin supposedly responded, "Yes, I know, they are so sentimental, I would kill you." And as we know, Ginsberg was a notorious pedophile, member of NAMBLA, North American Man-Boy Love Association. Who doesn't know? Well, as Adam Bernstein says in the Washington Post obituary, she was far happier as a provocateur than a politician. By many accounts, she was a galvanizing presence at all feminist rallies. Although Dworkin's books, filled with descriptions of what she considers the inherent violence of heterosexual relations, were repeatedly rejected by U.S. publishers, she succeeded in having them published most in the United Kingdom, where they enjoyed an enormous critical and popular success. But her novels were not popular even when published. The Literary Review described one of her novels as grossly disgusting. Well, I'm not going to talk about all her books because we don't have enough time for that. I'll mention only a few very briefly. Perhaps her best-known book is called Pornography, Man Possessing Woman, published in 1981. The book received positive attention from unlikely quarters, including Punch magazine, which said that she writes like a Leon Trotsky of the sex war. Dworkin campaigned ferociously against pornography. And here I also agree with her. And she argued that pornography was an instruction manual for rape. She regarded pornography as akin to terrorism even. But some fellow feminists objected to her crusade against pornography as an infringement on women's choice of how to use their bodies, and civil libertarians, of course, opposed it as an assault on the First Amendment. With law professor Catherine McKinnon, she wrote an ordinance passed by the city of Indianapolis that defined pornography as a kind of speech crime that violated the civil rights of all women. The law was later overturned as unconstitutional. But Dworkin's anti-pornography crusade, by the way, resulted in a notorious Canadian censorship law. And the funniest thing is that in 1993, copies of Dworkin's book Pornography were held for inspection by Canada's customs agents. So Dworkin's own book had been banned from Canada under a law that she herself had promoted. In year 2000, she published what she believed to be her life's work, 9 years in the making, the book called Scapegoat: The Jews, Israel, and Women's Liberation. Throughout history, argues Dworkin, women and Jews have been stigmatized as society's scapegoats. So in this book, she compares the oppression of women to the persecution of Jews, discusses the sexual politics of Jewish identity and anti-Semitism, and she came to endorse a bizarre version of lesbian separatism, calling for the establishment of a woman's homeland with land and guns as a response to the oppression of women. Well, here are a few reviews. Scapegoat, the book is an alarming, confrontational, full-tilt boogie through the vast catalog of injustices and horrors, individual and institutional, that have been visited on women and Jews through the ages, in a florid, violent, and accusatory synthesis of two different strands of classic victimology, says Julia Grayson in an article Andrea Dworkin in Agony, published in an online Salon magazine on September 20, 2000. Another review. It is an analysis of the Holocaust in Israel through the eye of gender relations, drawing together strands of Zionism, feminism, and Holocaust studies to produce a radical new thesis that the Jews downtrodden had to fight back, and that women downtrodden must do the same. This is from British Guardian. Yet another. Dworkin makes comparisons between phenomena like rape and pogroms, Nazi hate literature and pornography. The parallels she draws are not particularly original, but no one denies the importance of pointing out the way that one often similar persecution of Jews and women illustrates the dark side of human behavior in situations of unequal power. End of quote. For most of history, Dworkin says, women and Jews have had little or no capability or strength of their own, and thus have simply and nobly and righteously and innocently suffered. In Scapegoat, Dworkin makes a direct comparison between anti-Semitism and sexism on the one hand, and between Zionism and women liberation or feminism on the other. The Israelis are my guys, she wrote, going on to justify the conquest of the Palestinian land as being the result of centuries of anti-Semitic violence. But what she found in Israel, well, was, as she says, a male-dominated militaristic society. Well, it is a historic fact, by the way, that the rabbis had to declare Golda Meir an honorary male before we could recognize her as Prime Minister of Israel. Anyways, Dworkin argued that the victimization of Jewish men in pogroms plus Holocaust had led to their determination to demonstrate their masculinity by fighting to create a Jewish state, but over time that masculinity led to machoistic approach to Israeli women as well as to the Arab enemies. Dworkin's most original conclusion to all this is that women need land and guns. Women must reject pacifism and literally create their own militant separatist territory, womanland. As a practical concept, of course, the idea is nothing short of nuts, says Julia Grayson in Salon magazine. Dworkin also does not seem to see the inconsistency between her own blistering, demonizing prose and her condemnations of hate speech and hate literature. She said, words make killing easier, legitimate, or inevitable. Words can kill. Why, then, does Dworkin spew so much intemperate rhetoric herself, rhetoric that overtly justifies violence? Because it seems the people she is scapegoating deserve it. And then, in June 2000, Andrea Dworkin published two controversial articles in British newspapers, New Statesman and The